My name is Adam. For most of my life, I believed there was nothing beyond what we could see, touch, and measure. I used to say, with quiet confidence, we make our own meaning. It sounded noble, rational, free. This story is inspired by true events. It's told with deep respect for all faiths and meant only to share one man's journey toward finding peace in Islam. From which country are you watching this video? Subscribe to this channel if you love Islam. I was an atheist, but not the angry kind. I didn't hate religion. I just thought I had evolved past it. Faith, to me, was a relic, something humanity would outgrow once we had enough knowledge, enough control, enough science. But knowledge didn't quiet the nights. There was a time when I lived by schedules, numbers, and plans. I worked hard, I traveled often, I chased experiences because I thought meaning was something you earned. And, for a while, it worked, or at least it looked like it did. The laughter at dinner tables, the late-night debates about philosophy, the thrill of chasing the next goal, it all felt like proof that I was alive, that I was right. But behind the noise, there was always a silence I couldn't explain. It would appear in the quiet moments right before sleep, or in the middle of a crowded street. A whisper that said, "What if this isn't all there is?" I tried to ignore it, but life has a way of forcing you to listen. It happened one winter evening. I got a call from a friend's mother. Her voice was trembling. He was gone. A car accident. Just like that. We'd grown up together, school, music, long nights talking about the universe. And now, he was simply not there. I went to his funeral. The air was cold, sharp against my face. People prayed, their hands raised, voices soft but filled with something I didn't understand. Faith, hope, connection. I stood there like an outsider to the human experience. When they whispered, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un," I didn't know what it meant, but it sounded like peace. And I felt nothing. No peace, no comfort, just the heavy weight of nothingness. If life could end like that in an instant, without reason, then what was the point of all of this? Why did we love? Why did we dream if everything ended in oblivion? That night, for the first time, I realized my certainty wasn't strength. It was a cage. Days turned into months, but the questions stayed. I began to notice the world differently. The sun rising each morning exact, unwavering. The sky's balance, the way trees grew toward the light, the precision of breath itself. There was a pattern in everything. And for the first time, I wondered, who wrote it? I told myself it was evolution, physics, chance. But even randomness obeyed rules, and those rules were beautiful. I started walking at night just to think. Sometimes I'd stop under the stars and stare until my neck ached. It was strange, the more I looked outward, the smaller I felt. And in that smallness, something inside me softened. One night, I whispered into the empty air, "If you're real, show me." And then I laughed, because who was I talking to? But deep down, I think something heard me. A few weeks later, at work, I met someone named Yusuf. He was quiet, thoughtful, the kind of person who didn't need to prove anything. He prayed during lunch breaks, not out of show, but out of peace. There was a calmness around him that felt grounded. One afternoon, I asked him why he prayed so often. He smiled and said, "It's not about asking for things, it's about remembering who I belonged to. That answer unsettled me. Not because it was strange, but because it was beautiful. Because I didn't belong to anyone, not even myself. My whole life had been about control, but now I saw how little of it I really had. Curiosity became a quiet obsession. I began reading about Islam, not to believe, but to understand. Late nights, empty room, just me and the glow of my screen. When I opened the Quran, I expected to find something ancient, distant, maybe even irrelevant. But what I found was myself. There were verses that felt like they were written for the exact moment I was in. Words about the universe, the heart, the signs within ourselves. One verse stopped me completely. And he shows you his signs within yourselves. Do you not then see? I froze, because that's exactly what had been happening. I was seeing. The more I read, the less I resisted. It wasn't blind faith that was drawing me in. It was truth meeting understanding. It was science, finding its soul. But belief doesn't come without a fight. My ego pushed back. What would people say? Wouldn't this make me weak? Irrational? Hadn't I mocked the very idea of religion for years? Every argument I raised, the Quran had already answered. Every fear I held, it had already soothed. Still, I hesitated. Not because I didn't believe, but because belief meant surrender. One night, I sat by the window again, same cold air, same silence, and I whispered, "If this is real, guide me." The world didn't suddenly change, but my heart did. For the first time, I felt seen. Days passed. I started to pray clumsily, quietly, not even sure if I was doing it right. But every time I bowed, something inside me let go. I felt lighter. It wasn't about rituals or fear. It was about peace, about finally being honest with myself. And that's when I understood faith wasn't the enemy of reason. It was the answer to its deepest question. That was the beginning, the day the walls of certainty cracked, and through those cracks, the light of faith began to enter. I wasn't a Muslim yet, but I was no longer the same man who denied the possibility of God. Because sometimes, belief doesn't arrive with thunder or miracles. It comes quietly, like dawn after a long, dark night. And this was my dawn. I didn't plan to become a Muslim. I don't think anyone ever plans that kind of transformation. It wasn't a single moment of revelation, it was a series of small awakenings, like dawn creeping across the horizon. After that night by the window when I whispered, "Guide me if this is real," something in my heart shifted. I can't explain it logically. I just began to feel watched. Not in a fearful way, but in a comforting one. As if something greater was quietly guiding my steps. For the first time in my life, I began to pray. Not the kind of prayer that follows ritual or structure. I didn't know how to do that yet. It was just me, talking to the sky. I didn't even know who I was addressing, but every word I spoke felt like a release. At first, I was embarrassed. I had spent years mocking the idea of a personal God. But the strange thing was, the more I spoke, the less I cared about my pride. There was a peace in admitting I didn't have all the answers. Maybe that's what surrender really is. Not defeat, but freedom. Yusuf noticed the change in me. He didn't say much, but one day, over coffee, he said, "You've been thinking a lot lately." I nodded. He smiled, like he already knew. Then he said something simple. "Don't rush it, just keep seeking. Truth doesn't fear questions. That night, I searched up how to pray in Islam. I watched a video of a man explaining Salah the way Muslims stand, bow, and prostrate. It was so methodical, yet deeply poetic. He said, "When we place our forehead on the ground, it's the closest a person can be to God." I paused the video. The idea of lowering myself physically, emotionally, was foreign to me. I had built my whole identity on self-reliance, but the truth was, I was tired of carrying the weight of being my own God. I tried to pray that night. There was no mat, no Arabic words, no structure, just silence. I knelt on the floor of my apartment, the lights dim, the city humming outside. I bowed my head to the ground and whispered, "If you are there, this is me, surrendering." Something inside me broke open, not in pain, but in release. For years, I'd been searching for control. Now, I was learning how to let go. And in that letting go, I found peace unlike anything I'd known. Over the next weeks, I began reading more about the Prophet Muhammad wasallam, his life, his character, his patience. I expected to find a historical figure. Instead, I found a mirror. A man who had lost, who had been mocked, who had endured and yet always responded with mercy. Something about that moved me deeply. It wasn't just religion, it was humanity at its purest. There was one night I couldn't sleep. I got up and opened the Quran again. My eyes fell on a verse that said, "Call upon me, I will respond to you." I don't know why, but tears came before I could stop them. I had never cried from reading anything spiritual before. It felt like the words were written for me, like God Himself was answering that whisper from the window. Still, I was afraid to take the final step. I told myself I wasn't ready, that maybe I could just keep learning, keep feeling, without committing. But faith has its own gravity. Once it pulls you close, you can't float away. Yusuf invited me to a Friday prayer. I almost said no, but curiosity won. When I walked into the mosque, the first thing that hit me was the silence. Not empty silence, but sacred silence. Men of all colors and backgrounds stood shoulder to shoulder. No one cared about who had money, who had status, who had doubts. They all bowed together, equal before something greater. When I watched them put their heads to the ground, I felt something in my chest tighten. It wasn't jealousy, it was longing. I wanted to belong to that peace. After the prayer, I sat quietly at the back. An elderly man approached me. His beard was white, his smile gentle. He asked, "First time?" I nodded. He said, "Don't worry, we all had a first time." Then he placed his hand over his heart and said, This is where Islam begins." That sentence followed me for days, because that's exactly where it was happening in my heart. Not from logic, not from fear, but from love. A love that didn't demand perfection, only sincerity. A few nights later, I called Yusuf. My voice trembled when I said, "I think I'm ready." He didn't ask what I meant. He just said, "Come over." When I arrived, we sat in his small living room. There was no ceremony, no crowd, just the quiet hum of the world outside. He explained the Shahada, the declaration of faith. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulallah. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his messenger. I repeated the words, slowly, carefully. Each syllable felt like a weight being lifted from my chest. And when I finished, I couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't joy, it was peace. That night, when I returned home, I stood again by the window, the same spot where I once mocked prayer. But this time, I whispered, Alhamdulillah, all praise belongs to God. The city lights blinked below me. The wind brushed against my face. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. Because I knew, truly knew, that I was being watched, guided, and loved. Becoming Muslim didn't erase my past. It didn't make life suddenly easy or perfect, but it gave my pain a purpose, my doubts a direction, and my existence a meaning. The night I said the Shahada, the world didn't explode into color. There were no flashes of light or angelic choirs, just silence, stillness, and an unfamiliar sense of home. I remember walking back to my apartment, every step lighter than the last. The city around me looked the same streetlights, the same strangers, the same noise, but something inside me had changed. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was wandering. I felt like I was being led. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise without an alarm. It was strange my body somehow knew. The air outside was still dark and cool, the sky a deep shade of blue, and I thought, this is when Muslims pray. But I didn't know how, not properly, so I just sat on the floor, facing the faint light creeping through the window, and whispered, God, thank you for finding me. That was my first Fajr, my first dawn prayer. Incomplete, unstructured, but sincere. And I think in that moment, sincerity was enough. The first few weeks as a new Muslim were humbling. Everything felt foreign, the sounds, the words, even the way of washing before prayer. Wudu. I watched tutorial after tutorial, repeating each step. Hands, mouth, nose, face, arms, head, feet. Each motion had meaning, cleansing not just the body, but the mind. I remember thinking, how many times in my life have I rushed into the world without cleansing my thoughts first? When I learned the Arabic verses for prayer, I stumbled often. I'd mispronounce words, forget the order, bow too soon or too late. At times, frustration would rise like a tide, but then I'd remember what Yusuf told me. Allah doesn't look at the perfection of your prayer. He looks at the sincerity of your heart. And so, I kept going. The first time I prayed in a mosque after becoming Muslim, I stood at the very back. I was nervous, afraid I'd mess up, afraid people would notice I didn't belong. But when the Imam said, Allahu Akbar, and everyone raised their hands, I followed. And as we all bowed together, I felt it unity. No ranks, no status, no differences. Just one body moving in worship, one heart beating through 1,000 chests. When my forehead touched the ground, I felt tears slide down my face. Not of sadness, but of recognition. It was as if I'd been searching for this position my entire life. The posture of surrender. Outside the mosque, an old man greeted me. His hands were wrinkled, his smile warm. He said, "First time, praying?" I nodded shyly. He chuckled. "The first prayer is always the hardest. But remember, every prayer after this is a conversation with your Creator. Don't let it become routine." Those words stayed with me. Because for me, prayer wasn't routine, it was rescue. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice how prayer reordered my life. Before Islam, my days were ruled by deadlines and plans. Now, they revolved around something greater. 5 calls that divided my day. Fajr, Duhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha. Each one a pause, a reminder, a return. It was difficult at first. At work, I'd sneak into quiet corners to pray. At home, I'd still second-guess my recitation. But even in the struggle, there was peace, because every mistake brought me closer to humility. I remember one night vividly. It was late, almost midnight, and I couldn't sleep. The room was dim, the air still. I stood up, made wudu, and prayed 2 rakas, alone. When I went into sujood prostration, I didn't want to get up. My forehead pressed against the mat, my heart whispering without words. In that silence, I felt something indescribable, as if the world had fallen away. And it was just me and the one who made me. That was when I understood what Muslims meant by peace. It wasn't absence of pain. It was presence of purpose. But not everyone understood my change. Friends who once laughed with me now looked at me differently. Some thought I was brainwashed. Others thought I was just experimenting. One even said, "You? Religious? You used to make fun of this stuff." They weren't wrong. I had mocked faith once, and now, here I was defending what I'd once dismissed. It was a strange irony, but also a quiet justice. Because now I knew what faith truly was. Not blindness, but clarity. Still, their words hurt. There were nights I questioned myself, not because of doubt, but because of loneliness. And in those moments, I'd return to the Quran. Every time I opened it, it felt like a direct reply. Do people think they will be left alone because they say, "We believe," and not be tested? Tests, I realized, weren't punishments, they were proofs. Proofs of love, of patience, of faith. And so, I stayed firm. Months passed. My Arabic improved, my prayers became smoother, and my heart quieter. I started volunteering at the mosque, helping clean after Jummah, handing out water during Ramadan. The community slowly became my family. There was warmth in the brotherhood, in the greetings of Assalamu alaikum, in the shared meals, in the unspoken understanding that we were all walking the same path, just at different speeds. One evening after prayer, a young boy asked me, "Uncle, were you always Muslim?" I smiled and said, "No, but I think my heart always was." He grinned, satisfied with the answer. And I realized that was the truth. Every day, I continued to learn how to recite better, how to forgive deeper, how to surrender more completely. Islam didn't erase who I was, it refined me. It turned my questions into prayers and my emptiness into light. And every time I stand for prayer, I remember the man I used to be certain of everything, yet lost inside. Now, I'm uncertain of many things, but I'm certain of one. This is my journey, not of perfection, but of direction. From disbelief to discovery, from ego to submission, from emptiness to peace. And as I bow my head each day, I whisper the same words I said that first night. Guide me if this is real. Only now I know the answer. It's been years since I first whispered the Shahada. Years since that lonely night by the window, the night I asked for a sign. And still, every dawn feels like the first. Every call to prayer feels like an echo of that moment when my heart first woke up. I used to think faith would make me perfect, untouchable, always calm, but I learned that faith doesn't erase struggle, it transforms it. Because even now, I still have days of doubt, moments of weakness, times when the world feels too heavy, and my prayers feel too quiet. But the difference now is that I know where to turn. One night not long ago, I found myself sitting once again by that same window, the one where my journey began. The city lights shimmered below, the same familiar hum in the distance. But this time, I wasn't searching, I was remembering. I thought about the man I used to be, the skeptic, the intellectual, the self-proclaimed realist. He thought faith was for the weak, but now I see that it takes far more courage to kneel than to mock, to surrender than to resist, to believe despite the unknown. As the years passed, Islam stopped being something I practiced and became something I lived. It wasn't just about praying 5 times a day or fasting once a year. It was about how I treated people, how I spoke, how I carried mercy in moments of anger, and how I learned to forgive, not because others deserved it, but because I needed it. Before Islam, I lived for myself. After Islam, I lived with myself, finally at peace. Ramadan came, my first one as a Muslim. The first few days were difficult, the hunger, the fatigue, the long hours. But then, something shifted. Each fast wasn't deprivation, it was purification. Every sunset, every sip of water, every day tasted like gratitude. And when I heard the Adhan echo at Maghrib, it felt like the universe itself was whispering, "You made it." The hunger taught me discipline. The silence taught me reflection. The nights taught me intimacy with my Creator. And by the end of that month, I understood something profound Islam wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about returning to who I was meant to be. My family's reaction wasn't easy. They didn't understand at first. They thought I'd joined something foreign, something distant. But I didn't argue. I lived it quietly. I showed them patience where I used to show pride, kindness where I once showed sarcasm. And over time, they began to see the change, not in my words, but in my peace. One evening, my mother said, "You've become softer." I smiled and said, "I've become closer." She didn't ask what I meant, but I think she understood. There's a verse in the Quran that always brings me back to that night by the window. Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth, light upon light. That's what my journey has been, one light leading to another. From ignorance to curiosity, from curiosity to faith, from faith to love. Every prayer, every struggle, every tear, it was all part of that light, guiding me, even when I didn't know I was being guided. Now, when I hear the call to prayer, I stop whatever I'm doing. It's not out of obligation, it's out of longing, because those few minutes are my sanctuary. They remind me that I was never meant to control life, only to trust its author. And that, I think, is the essence of Islam, trust. Sometimes people ask, "Do you ever miss your old life?" I smile, because I don't. I miss who I thought I was, but I love who I'm becoming. I've learned that belief isn't a finish line, it's a road. And every step, every stumble, every Allahu Akbar whispered through tears is another step closer to home. Now, every night before sleep, I say the same simple prayer. Ya Allah, keep me guided as you guided me once before. And sometimes I imagine my old self, the skeptic, staring at the stars, still searching. If I could speak to him now, I'd say, "Stop searching for answers in the void. Look within. The light you seek is already there." Faith didn't make me someone different. It revealed the part of me I'd buried, the part that always believed, even in silence. And now, when I pray, when I whisper Bismillah before each act, I'm not performing, I'm remembering. Remembering that I was never truly alone, that every question, every pain, every loss was leading me right here, home. And so, my journey from atheist to believer doesn't end with a grand conclusion, but with peace, quiet, enduring, merciful peace. The kind that fills the heart, not the mind. The kind that whispers, you are exactly where you were meant to be. This is my story. A story of questions that led to prayer, of reason that led to revelation, of darkness that led to light. And if my journey has taught me anything, it's this: guidance isn't found by chance, it's given when the heart finally becomes still enough to receive it. Alhamdulillah, all praise is for the one who guided me when I was lost, who found me in disbelief and turned my emptiness into faith, who replaced my confusion with clarity and my loneliness with love. This is where my story ends and my real life begins.